One more again.
Yes.
Uh, Welcome to the podcast, Brothers of Many Words. I'm your host, RP.
I'm your co-host, King Mackie.
Special guest King Christopher.
King Christopher. We are short one king tonight. He's going to step back from the book club for a little bit, but he will be with us on open mic night. We wish the best for young king and hope to have him back soon. How's everybody doing this evening?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Loving life, brother man. How about you?
I'm doing good, man. The kids on spring break. It's been a beautiful chaos to say the least. It's always go gadget go for sure before the kids.
Right,
There's no doubt. There's
right.
no doubt. Daddy. Okay,
Gotta love it, man. Gotta love it, because one
that's
day you won't be
Yeah,
hearing that no more.
yeah.
it's coming fast too. It's coming fast.
Be that grandpa, grandpa. Oh, my fault. Your
Yeah,
baby's still young, but I'm just saying though.
I
Oh
know.
man,
I know what you mean.
one day, yeah, one day.
One day, absolutely, absolutely. A little bit of words of positivity here this evening.
Yes,
I
sir.
hope you realize that every day is a fresh start for you. Every sunrise is a new chapter in your life waiting to be written. And that applies to all of us. When your eyeballs open, you got another shot. You got another shot to do
Yes,
things
sir.
better. And I encourage you to do your best to take advantage of it. Tomorrow
Yes,
is promised to no one. Give each shot today your best shot each and every day. Each and every day.
yes,
That's
sir.
All
right.
right. The purpose of the podcast. The purpose of the podcast is
Mm,
various subjects by way of reading books and articles related to the topics picked, which would allow us to discuss, review, debate, and enlighten ourselves along the way, as well as those the origins of religions. The origins of Africa, excuse me. The origins of Africa are deeply rooted in the continent's role as the cradle of humanity. All modern humans, Homo sapiens, share a common origin in Africa, as supported by genetic, fossil, and archaeological evidence. This subject is very powerful, explosive, passionate, and absolutely very entertaining. So this is the book. The book, if you can see that there, introductions to civilizations. We're on the last two chapters, and it's been a beautiful book so far. Informative, a lot of great information. Mr. Jackson is, in my opinion, is a good author. There's no doubt about it in my book. Um, so we kick off tonight here, Mr. King Court. I mean, Mr. King Haru. We're gonna kick us off tonight.
all right, all right. So I have pages 283 to 237 of the Introduction of African Civilization. So let's get to it. There are two key sections of this book between these pages. Number one is Zimbabwe and Monatapia and other kingdoms of the interior. And then number two, we have the destruction of African culture. These chapters transition from describing advanced African civilization to explaining how colonization and outside forces dismantled many of those systems. Okay, so my summary is advanced civilizations in Southern Africa. Jackson explains that powerful and sophisticated African states existed in the interior of Southern Africa, especially around the Great Zimbabwe and Manatapia Empire. These societies built large stone cities without mortar, controlled major gold trade networks within the Indian Ocean world, had organized political systems, and strong economic influence. European explorers later tried to claim these structures were built by outsiders, for example, as Phoenicians, Arabs, or political figures. Because they refused to believe these Africans built such an advanced city, Jackson argues this was a deliberate distortion of history. All right. Continue on my summary. Wealth and global trade networks. The region's wealth came primarily from gold mining, trade routes linking Africa to Arabia, India, and Asia, also merchants along the Swahili coast. These networks show Africa was part of a global economic system long before European colonization. The destruction of African institutions. The second section of these pages shifts to a dark theme: the systematic dismantling of African societies. Jackson argues that destruction happened through several forces: European colonial conquest, missionary influence, economic exploitation, and cultural erasure. Colonial systems replaced African institutions with European political, economical, and religious structures, weakening traditional governance and knowledge systems. So, here are my three important points. Um, Jackson explains that kingdoms like those surrounding Great Zimbabwe and Manatapia Empire grew powerful, largely because they controlled gold mines and trade routes connected to the Indian trade network, as we mentioned before. European powers eventually moved to dominate these regions because of that wealth. So modern parallel is what I want to kind of bring in into this conversation. Many global tensions still revolve around resource-rich regions, especially in Africa, where nations possess cobalt, which is critical for batteries, lithium, rare earth minerals, and oil and gas. Countries and corporations compete heavily for these minerals because they drive modern technology and military industries. Um, Number two is control of trade routes. So, global influence. Jackson describes how African states um, prospered because they were part of a major international trade system linking Africa, Arabia, India, and Asia. Whoever controlled the trade routes had economic leverage and political power. This idea mirrors geopolitical theories such as heartland theory, which argues that control over strategic geographical areas leads to control of world trade and influence. Um, and I want to go through heartland theories. Let me explain a little bit of that real quick, if you guys don't mind. So, the
Yeah.
heartland theory is the foundational concept in geopolitical introduced by British geographer Sir Halford Mackinder in his 1904 paper, The Geographical Pivot of History. It argues that control of the central landmass of Eurasia, the so called heartland, provides the key to global power. The idea shaped 20th century strategic thinking and continues to influence geopolitical analysis today. Um, Mr. Mackinder, his famous dictum is quote, "Who rules East Europe commands the heartland. Who rules the heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world." Close quotes. Okay. So it's a little bit about the heartland theory. But number three of my bullet points is cultural influence shapes political power. Jackson argues that colonial powers did more than take land and resources. They reshaped education, religion, and culture identity. By replacing indigenous systems with European ones, colonial authorities created long term dependency and ideology influence. All right. So power is no longer only military, it also includes information and cultural dominance. But the larger pattern Jackson hints at is that civilizations often rise or fall based upon three things: control of resources, control of trade and networks, and control of cultural narratives. All right. And in my conclusion, I would like to state this: long before modern geopolitical theories existed, Africa's civilizations were already controlled major global trade networks. Centuries before the concept of the heartland theory was proposed by Halford Mackinder in 1904, African kingdoms such as centered around Great Zimbabwe and the kingdoms of Matapia were already controlling vital trade routes connecting the interior of Africa to the Indian Ocean trade network through gold, ivory, and merchant exchanges with Arabia, India, and Asia. African states played a central role in world commerce. In other words, what later became geopolitical theory was already historic reality. Control of strategic regions and trade condors meant economic power and global influence. I thank you for your time, but that was my pages 283 to 317. And the key sections of this particular pages were Zimbabwe, the Manitoba, and other kingdoms of the interior, and the destruction of African culture. Thank you.
That's very good, brother. Very good. Very good.
It's phenomenal, man. Phenomenal, brother.
Thank you, sir. Thank
All
you,
right.
sir.
When you go ahead and move on.
Sure.
All right. So I was assigned pages 317 to page 334, which kind of dips into both chapters. Got three topics here. My first topic for discussion is Africa had real civilization, scholarship, and institutions. The first point Jackson makes is very strongly is that Africa had deep civilization and intellectual life long before outsiders later acted like it never existed. In chapter 9, Jackson centers of knowledge. In ancient Egypt, there's a city called Thebes, and Thebes had an amazing culture. Also, Alexandria, the great libraries of the Moorish world, and Timbuktu. He talks about libraries, universities, scholars and manuscripts, and educational institutions. And I think that matters because it's not about making a vague emotional argument. He's trying to establish evidence. He is showing that Africa had organized scholarship, stored knowledge, and traditions of learning. That stood out to me a lot because before somebody can understand destruction, they first have to understand what existed beforehand.
Great point.
And if you if you start the story in the middle, it becomes easy for people to assume Africa had nothing. And then later, European power supposedly brought civilization to it. But Jackson is clearly arguing the opposite here. He's saying that Africa already had a civilization. It already had literacy and scholarship, architecture, trade, political systems, and education culture. So when these things were later damaged or erased, it created the false impression that they had never been there in the first place. So I think the most important parts of these chapters Jackson is trying to correct is the memory of Africa. He's trying to tell us, the reader, that history didn't begin when Europeans showed up. I think it's a very important point because people are taught a false beginning that everything that in order to Africa has been distorted because of the European influence. Now we move on to the second topic. Africulture was deliberately damaged. I think this is a pretty important. Jackson does not describe the decline of African culture as something natural, accidental, or self-inflicted in any simple way. He presents it as something done through invasion, slavery, exploitation, colonialism, and ideology. So he gives example after example. He talks about Thebes being looted. He talks about Alexandria, the destruction of knowledge there, Timbuktu, and the breaking apart of the scholarly society. East Africa cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, where the Europeans first arrived, appearing as outsiders, seeing access, later returned with force, plunder, and control over the trade. Then he goes on further to expand his argument. The books and cities to the people of these places. That's where the chapter really kind of, to me, is a big point, is these countries were kind of like the Portuguese, kind of the Spaniards floated down, acted like they were friends, like they were kind of interested in the area, scoping it out, right? And then they left and they come back and they freaking conquered it.
Right.
So I think that pretty much sums up that point right there. And just to dig into the last chapter of Africa Rising once more, Jackson starts with the 1945 Pan African Congress in Manchester and in the 1946 conference in Bamako. He presents those as major turning points. These meetings matter because they show Africans and African descended thinkers beginning to organize politically around freedom, autonomy, and self government. He mentions leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois,
Hmm.
Kawam,
Hmm.
Nkrumah,
Yeah.
Jomo Kenyatta, and later Sekou Toure. And what starts to emerge is continental pattern after beginning to think politically as a rising force instead of just a colonized object. Um, Jackson moves on country by country, showing what the resurgence looked like as he talks about the big areas like Ghana, New Guinea, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, and many other countries throughout Africa. And what I appreciate about Jackson is he does not make a resurgence sound easy. Um, he doesn't pretend to independence is automatically just fixes everything. He talks about how there's a lot of coups, instability, civil war, outside interference, regional division, and the challenge of building strong institutions after a long domination from the Europeans. Nigeria is a good example of that. Independence comes, but unity is still fragile. Nigeria kept on going up and down, up and down. Congo is another example of that. But the freedom with the Congos, it came from an outside entrance. A lot of the French were involved in them gaining their independence. Um, so the strongest takeaway in that in chapter 10 right there for me is Africa is no longer simply being acted upon. It's starting to finally rev up its engine. It's building schools, writing constitutions, forming governments, reorganizing economies, and at the same time, all these things are happening. You got outside influence, Europeans, civil war amongst each other too, and they're still here to. I mean, they're still making progress. As we see today, this book was written in early 2000s, I think, when mine was published. So a little behind on the times, but very interesting.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely, bro. Lovely, man. Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Yeah, that's great stuff right there. That's great stuff. I was just looking at it. So, excuse me. It was copyrighted in 1970, so it's been a little bit of time. So, but it's definitely great work. So, for me, those two chapters, the destruction of African culture and African resurgence, in reading those, and then, excuse me, when you come across the different countries, one thing that kept sticking out to me as I'm reading them is like they were under the protection of the British consul or the High Commissioner. They were under the control of the French government, and so what that made me think of was in total what it resonated with me is like it was the colonization of Africa, from start to finish. And so my bullet points will be over that topic itself. So my first bullet point, I'll say each one, and then if you want to comment, I'll leave a little time if you want to comment at each one of them. Okay, so the first bullet point is the beginning history of the colonization of Africa. External colonies were first founded in Africa during antiquity, which we covered during our last podcast in reference to the ancient Greeks and Romans who established colonies on the African continent in North Africa. Some of these colonies lasted for centuries. However, when the word colonialism is spoken in modern times about Africa, it usually focuses on the European conquest of African states and societies. The beginning of colonization in Africa developed over several centuries and happened in phases. It did not start with full control of the continent. Um, Instead, it began with trade, exploration, and coastal settlements, and later turned into large-scale territorial conquests by European powers who were Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Spain, Belgium, and Italy. The first stage of colonization, the early European contact between the 14 and 1600s, began when European explorers started sailing along the African coast, as Chris just mentioned. In the 1400s, explorers from Portugal led voyages down the West African coast under the sponsorship of Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator was a Portuguese prince and a central figure in the early days of the Portuguese Empire and 15th century European maritime exploration. Europeans created trading posts and forts rather than inland colonies. These forts traded gold, ivory, spices, and later enslaved people. An example would be the Elmina Castle, built in 1482 in present-day Ghana, became one of the earliest European forts in Africa. At this stage, Africans controlled most trade networks, and Europeans depended heavily on African kingdoms. From the 1500s to the 1800s, European influence grew through the system known as the transatlantic slave trade. During this time, millions of Africans were transported to the Americas. Coastal trading centers expanded. European nations competing in Africa included Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands. Europeans still control very little land inland. Powerful African states like Mali, the Mali Empire, Shanghai Empire, and the Kingdom of Benin remained politically independent. During the 1800s began the exploration of the interior of Africa. They mapped rivers like the Congo and searched for trade routes and natural resources. The industrial complex of Europe wanted rubber, minerals, palm oil, and land for settlement. This increased the pressure to control territory instead of just trade. From the period of 1880 to 1914, it is known as the Scramble for Africa. True colonization happened rapidly during the late 19th century. European nations met at the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, organized by Otto von Bismarck of Germany, who was a statesman and chancellor for that country. They divided Africa among themselves without African participation. Major colonial powers included Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal, and Italy. One extreme example was the personal colony of King Leopold II, called the Congo Free State, where millions of Africans died due to forced labor and violence. By 1914, nearly the entire continent, 90% of Africa, was under European rule, except Ethiopia, which successfully resisted colonization, and Liberia, which was an independent republic. Africa went from being one of the wealthiest regions in the medieval world to becoming colonized in less than 40 years. That shift is one of the most dramatic turning points in world history. That's bullet point number one.
Mm.
Any thoughts on that?
Man,
Should have kept going.
bro, go ahead.
Go
But
get-
yeah. Wow.
Bullet point number two. What impact did colonization have on African culture, society, psychology, economically, and philosophically? Culturally, colonization led to significant cultural and social upheaval. Traditional power structures were dismantled, and colonial rulers often favored certain ethnic groups, creating divisions and rivalries that persist to this day. European languages such as English, French, and Portuguese became official languages in many countries. Indigenous languages were often discouraged in school and administration. Religiously, Christian missionary activity expanded rapidly. Traditional African spiritual systems were often labeled primitive and pagan. Educationally, colonial education systems emphasized European history and values. African knowledge systems, histories, and philosophies were frequently marginalized. Many colonial schools promoted European literature while ignoring African intellectual traditions. Socially, colonial rule altered social structures and community organization. Colonial powers drew artificial borders without considering ethnic or cultural divisions. This grouped rival communities together and split ethnic groups across countries. Borders created at the Berlin Conference still define most African states today. New social hierarchies were implemented, which created racial and administrative hierarchies with Europeans at the top. Colonial economies built cities around ports, railways, and mines. This disrupted traditional rural life and migration patterns. Philosophically, psychologically, colonialism affected the way how people saw themselves in their history. It internalized inferiority. Colonial ideology often portrayed African cultures as inferior to European civilization. Generations were taught that progress meant becoming more European. Identity conflict. Many Africans grew up balancing indigenous identities with colonial cultural expectations. Cultural dislocation. Some communities lost historical knowledge due to the suppression of oral traditions and institutions. Economically, economically, the economic impact on colonization was profound. African economies, previously diverse and largely self-sufficient, were reoriented to serve the needs of the colonial powers. This invaded the exploration of natural resources and the establishment of cash crop economies at the expense of local food production. Labor practices, including forced labor and oppressive taxation systems, were implemented to maximize profits, leading to widespread poverty and economic dependency.
Mhm.
The colonial economy was designed primarily to benefit European powers. Colonies were organized around exporting raw materials such as rubber, gold, and cocoa. Industrial development inside Africa was limited. The infrastructures were built for extraction. Railways and roads connected mines and plantations to ports rather than linking them to African economies internally. Many post independence economies remained dependent on exporting raw materials to global markets. Philosophically and intellectually, colonization reshaped African intellectual traditions and political thought. Colonial powers imposed new political structures, often based on European models, disregarding existing systems of governance. This reorganization resulted in the centralization of power and the creation of modern Africa states with borders that often did not reflect realities on the ground. The introduction of new governance systems also meant the erosion of traditional leadership and governance structures, leading to a loss of autonomy and self-determination.
Mm.
That was bullet point number two.
Oh wow. Oh, wow.
That was
That's
bullet point
deep.
number.
That's deep.
That's deep. That's deep. That's how when I was reading those two chapters, that's kind of what I was thinking when he was kind of getting around to. Um,
Right.
so um, that's how it hit me. So
Right.
I got one more. Want me to read that? You guys want to comment?
No, no, go ahead.
Last
Rock and roll.
bullet point number three. What was the lasting legacy of colonialism on Africa and how has it recovered? The legacy of colonialism in Africa is complex. Colonial rule reshaped political borders, economies, identities, and institutions. After independence in the mid 20th century, African nations began rebuilding systems rooted in their own priorities while also dealing with structures left behind by colonial powers. Political legacy, borders, and state structures. One of the most lasting colonial impacts came from the way of the continent was divided. Long term effects. Many countries contain multiple ethnic groups that had not previously been governed together. Some ethnic groups were split across several countries. Colonial governments centralized authorities in ways unfamiliar to some traditional political systems. Recovery and adaptation. Many nations adopted constitutional systems combining modern governance and local traditions. Regional organizations such as the African Union work to promote cooperation and peaceful conflict resolution across the continent. Economic legacy. Extraction based economies, cultural economies, were designed mainly to extract resources for Europe. The mining of minerals, producing cash crops like cocoa, cotton, and rubber, exporting raw materials rather than manufacturing goods. This system left many African economies independent on commodity exports. Recovery and adaptation. Countries have increasingly diversified their economies. Manufacturing, technology, and service sectors are growing in several nations. Cities such as Lagos and Nairobi have become major economic and innovation hubs, culturally and linguistic legacy. Colonial rule introduced European languages like English, French, and Portuguese in government and education. However, with that being said, Africa remains one of the most linguistically diverse regions in the world, with thousands of indigenous languages still spoken. Recovery and adaptation. Cultural revival movements have promoted indigenous languages, literature, and traditions. African art, music, and film have become globally influential. For example, the Nigerian film industry, often called Nollywood, is one of the largest film industries in the world.
Mm,
Psychologically and identity legacy. Colonialism also influenced how Africans viewed themselves and their histories. Some colonial systems promoted the idea that European culture represented modernity, modernization, while African traditions were backward. After independence, intellectual movements sought to reclaim African identity. Infrastructure and institutions. Colonial governments built railways, ports, and administrative systems. However, much of the infrastructure was designed mainly to move resources to ports for export. The independent movement. The recovery process began with the independence movements across the continent. One of the most significant milestones was when Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence in 1957. During the 1960s, many countries followed a period often called the Year of Africa. Africa's post-colonial story is not only about the challenges left by colonialism, but also about adaptation, resistance, and cultural renewal.
mm.
Listen, I that's that's it's it's a shame.
Yeah,
It's a shame,
It
yeah,
sure is.
and we will cover King Leopold down the
right,
road,
right,
and we will cover the Atlantic slave trade. Those are definitely two important scenarios that happened in Africa. Um, we will cover those, but I thought, how all that went down is wild.
yeah, yeah.
Africa is huge. It's a huge country,
Hmm.
and to just go in and just take it for what you want, as we have read, you know, all the resources that Africa has. It's been that way since antiquity.
Right,
Um,
right,
most of the resources that support Western civilization comes from Africa.
right, right, right.
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
yeah. And it's at a rise right now. You only keep something down for so long now.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, it's been predicted by Professor Sachs, was Professor Sachs, that was stating um, in the next 15 to 18 years, Africa could be the world superpower.
Hmm.
Right now, it is coming up on Asia to be the world's third superpower over Asia in the next 5 to 10 years, possibly 7 years. So, what was once down is on its way up again. So,
Absolutely.
um, but that would be the perks of today. That would be the highlight of today, I would say, because it's a sad case. It's a sad case.
Yes.
And when you read
Yes.
it, no matter who you are, and I think the number one thing that comes with this, and even that comes with this, is that every person that is on this earth, this great rock, should have some sense of um I don't want to use the word anger, but if Africa is the home of mankind, that means everybody has been, um, disemboweled from their own lineage in a
Yes.
sense. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yes.
A piece of the pie of not only Africa but other countries too as well, and other tribes. But anyway, have been ripped away from everybody. Everybody. This is world history that has been literally erased, you know and so there should be some type of umph in everybody to want to understand who and where they came from.
I think there's definitely a level.
I'm with you, man.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
I was saying I agree with you, brother, and I hope in the future, if Africa does become a superpower once again, that it doesn't do that over through dictatorship, that it can actually become a republic of free people, and then with the ability and hopes without government oversight to actually see what's under the ground in Africa and what they've been holding back, because there is a lot of discoveries that's been made, and the governments there's too much going on for anyone to actually discover anything. And anytime there's a new discovery, a government goes in and covers up, and then doesn't really let us know what they actually discovered. We just hear the back end and rumors and whatnot.
Right.
Then becoming a superpower with the ability to actually uncover these secrets, maybe that.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think there's a level of comfortableness with to what the point Haru was talking about, a little bit more for people to find out what's going on. People are very comfortable. So if you didn't have to travel that road, why would you? Why would you want to see what's going on? Because if you were raised a certain way, and it's been embedded in you and drilled into you and taught to you, that this is the way and this is the only way, you're probably not going to have that to go out there and search for that knowledge. Again, why would you? Your life is comfortable. However, we are different in that regard. It's like, why not? Where did things start? Why did this happen? Why is there separation? This and that and the other. Very powerful book, and Chris made a good point as well too, man. That reading the colonization.
I got some questions.
Yeah, I know you do, King. I know you do. Go ahead and spit them out.
All right, man. So first question we got here: what do you think Jackson most wants the reader to understand in chapter 9? That African culture was destroyed, that it was later denied, or that both happened together? And me personally, I think the African culture was destroyed and denied at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I have to agree. It was definitely dismantled. And I don't think things were rewritten either. You know what I mean? I believe things were also taken. You see what I'm saying? You don't try to reinvent the wheel of
Yes.
anything. We've read that even before, and I believe or we discussed this in our previous podcast of how things were taken and then used as their own. But I'm with you on Chris. I think it was definitely dismantled and then ultimately denied.
No, I'm in agreement with you gentlemen as well. It's with both of them. It surely was destroyed and dismantled with much purpose and much vigor and with much greed. That there's no doubt about it. I agree with you. That's a great question. I agree. Both of those are in play.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, man. Then I got another question. And for me, this question, my answer is going to be a little bit long, but me personally, this is what I got from the most out of these two chapters. And here's the question: if people are all one human race, how should we talk honestly about the destruction Jackson describes without turning the conversation into more racial division instead of deeper understanding? Talking about the slave trade and how it got going in Africa in terms of the Western world, I want to read this insert that Jackson puts in it's the very end of chapter 9. It's the appendix of chapter 9, cited by J.C. DeGraff Johnson in African Glory, page 51 to page 52. And they're saying this is a statement of Henry Junod, a prominent Swiss Protestant missionary. And it states, I speak of resignation. It is necessary to the blacks, for despite all that has been written on the fundamental exhume of the absolute equality of mankind, that they are an inferior race, a race made to serve. It would be harmful to them to cover up the evident fact under a pile of sentimental eloquence. Christianity alone will make out of the black a servant satisfied with his lot, for it is alone can bring him to a free and voluntary submission to the plans of divine providence. Everyone, I will even say the whole of humanity, is deeply concerned that the Negro should accept the position assigned to him by his physical and intellectual faculties. Without the arms of the natives, the gold mines of Johannesburg, which have built up the prosperity of South Africa, would cease to exist from one day to the next, for it is these arms which accomplish the entire manual labor in the extracting of gold. Then again, when we consider the eminent plains of the coast of Delgado, the valleys of Nakahamuti, and the Limpopo and the Zambezi, how could these fertile territories be exploited if the blacks refused their aid? And just to end with that question, to really understand how racism really started, we have to understand that it was a religion that thought it was more powerful and thought that since the Europeans believed in this religion and the people they were invading did not, they were a different color. They're black. I think that's really important to understand, that it wasn't just a separation of race of black and white, that it came from religion.
Yeah.
And a lot of wars, every single war on this entire planet that's ever happened, is because of religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love Jesus Christ, and I'm a believer in Christ, and I believe in his teachings, but I do not believe in religion, because religion demands power over someone else, and that you have a higher divinity to someone else, and so they should listen to you. And this is what it causes.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Robert, you want to jump on?
That's another powerful question. Is it possible these days to have a discussion, about the beginnings without, racial division of it? I don't know. Most people can't get past that. The separation of skin is so powerful for them. And to what you mentioned about Christianity, I think that's absolutely correct. I'll say this too. So since, as you said, since people are all one human race, at one point in time on this earth, that it was just black people. At one point in time on this earth, it was just black people. And you can't dispute that if you like. I encourage you to pick up a book and do some research, and you will eventually come to that conclusion. And so with that being said, we're all one race, but it just, even the Romans didn't, there were light skin, dark skin, but they didn't view people. There was no division because of the color of your skin. They didn't view people in that way. Even the ones that they wouldn't conquer, it didn't matter. There were intermarriages and all this stuff, but it wasn't because of this color of your skin. It was mainly because of, your civilization and who you were that they conquered, that so to speak. But it wasn't never, you were enslaved because of the color of your skin. And you're dead on with Christianity bringing that separation into that, and making that a powerful separation, which is strong in the world today still.
But more specific on the Christianity part, it specifically comes from the Christian Europeans.
Yes. Yes.
You know what? I really believe that we have more declassification or classification than racism. I think it's more about classification, and even what, Chris brought up about the Christian, the church, and it was about money. It was about power, so even right now, or you think about the conquering of the United States before it was even in existence. It wasn't the rich men used the poor man, and I use these terms because it's how the world uses it. But the rich white man used the poor white man to conquer the United States. You know what I mean? Because Britain was overconsumed with filth and with rapers and murderers and young kids, and they dumped people into the United States that seen and realized that they had a second chance or a second opportunity to gather some type of resources, where that came down to gold, land, whatever that was for them. So, um, but when we talk about the racial division and how we can discuss it based upon Chris's question, is that every person in this world should have, like I said, should have some sense of animosity, right? Because they are part of the African mankind. And if you deny that, then, like the Bible says, when you deny God every day, when you deny a part of you, you're denying God, whether that's whatever that may be. So I'm with Robert too, because it's hard to discuss this without talking about the so-called racism. But then again, I do believe it's some classification in there that brought the second layer of that, which became racism. But if you were always worth less, you were always treated less. Period. Whatever color you were. And when we think about even the Europeans, I don't even like using that, because when you think about Rome and the Celtics, they were both light skinned or white people, if you would say, you know what I mean, in the time that Rome conquered the Celtics. And so it was white on white. You know what I mean? And like Robert said, it wasn't based upon racism, it's based upon really classification, because they were considered savages and didn't have the mannerism of the Romans. You know what I mean? And so, and so, but I do believe that when it comes down to Chris's question, is that um in order to have a serious and mature conversation with anyone, they need to be able to understand the true history and where they came from, and then racism plays no factor.
Hmm. And that's a great point. You're exactly right. You have to know your history, because it's like when you see some of these uh, so-called intellectual people, having these discussions on TV, one black, one white, especially if one is getting um, the best of the other. The fail-safe is always racist.
It
The
is.
fail-safe is
It
always
is.
racist.
It
Always.
is. Yes. Yes. And that goes for both sides. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been pulled over hundreds of times, and I never got shot. I never been
Yes.
talked too crazy. I never been yanked out of my car. Do you know
That's
what I
right.
mean? So we allow the world to get the people allow the world to get the best of them. And so
Yes.
when you indulge yourself into the narrow path, right, or the expanded path of ignorance, then that's where you lie, So, but anyway, I digress, brother. I know you got two more questions.
Um, well, I got actually one more question. The last question is, what do you think matters more for real national recovery after oppression? Political independence, education, strong leadership, or a sense of shared human unity beyond tribal, national, or racial lines? Um, Me personally, in my opinion, I think it's the number one most important thing for bringing a country and people back online would be education.
Yes.
Um, that's
Yes.
that's number one. Is if a person is most likely has education and has
Right.
knowledge and truth, they're
Right.
going to have a better life, and they're going to also treat other people better.
Right.
And um, and as you can see, usually education is what's the first thing that's actually suppressed,
That is so true.
um,
Hmm.
or proper education and the truth.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and also for a country needs to be unified. A people needs to be unified if they want to build something. Humans are always better together, never apart. And becoming tribal and separating ourselves makes us a lot weaker.
Hmm.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. Division. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you on education. I mean, that's what brought us all of us together was through education. You know what I mean? And if each one of us lacked a particular knowledge, we wouldn't be on this podcast right now. You know what I mean? So education is key. And I'm with you on unity. You know what I mean? And I think that's the foundation of this earth is to have unity. You know what I mean? And the fact that we're going the opposite direction, we already see the chaos that it has brought. And matter of fact, we have seen the chaos over thousands, or at least the last 5 to 600 years. We can see how division has brought chaos because
Mhm.
regardless of what people truly understand is that at one point in time there was a great harmony on this earth where
Sure,
everybody harmonized and
sure.
there was limited chaos. But I think the foundation of this world in the last 5 to 600 years have been based upon chaos, and if you enter into chaos you must die by chaos.
I'm in agreement with you gentlemen as well with the education standpoint also. And also too, as I've read about the colonization, what makes it hard for them, not only were they going through all the tragedy and turmoil of being enslaved and snatched, but also these tribes, they were grouping these tribes, rival tribes, in together. That in itself it was tough. So it's a little bit of that shared unity too as well. That's different for us because we don't understand that, but for them that's how they lived, and that's how their cultures were. So you have a tribe here, 5 miles down the road, and you got another one, and they're rivals, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and said, well, now all you going to be together, and then you throw 3 or 4 more different tribes. Now you chaos.
Right.
So, and we're still persist to this day. However, we're seeing that they are coming out of that. Africa is finding itself again and being able to work through those things. But I'm in agreement with both you gentlemen, all the points that you made. Listen, great book,
Hmm.
great book, great
Right.
book.
I learned a lot from this book.
Yes.
Absolutely. Introduction to African Civilizations, John G. Jackson. Get it. It's beautiful. Beautiful book. Anything else? Anybody want to comment on the book?
No, I think it was, well, I say no, but yes, wonderful book. It's enlightening to know
Yeah.
this information. It's empowering on both sides. You know what I
Yes.
mean? To understand this, because when you looked into Western history, in most cases as being what they call an African American man, you're just brought on the ship and should be thankful for what you privilege that you currently have now, not
Right.
knowing that you had a privilege beyond royalty at one point in time, or at least your ancestors did. And
Right.
so, yet again, it's a heavy heart, but with that heavy heart, I have to admit there's a crown that sits on top of it that keeps me moving
Absolutely.
every single day. So I appreciate you, Kings, for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the next book.
Absolutely. 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 All right. Moving on. What about that spotlight on beautiful people?
All right, y'all. So we have a spotlight tonight, and our spotlight is Dr. Shirley Jackson, a theoretical physicist whose research at Bell Laboratories contribute to technologically behind. Uh, uh, excuse me. So number one was touch tone phones, caller ID, and fiber optic communication. Why she matters. Her work laid groundwork for modern telecommunications and backbone of today's digital world. Yet most people use these technology daily without knowing her. Before smartphones connected the world, Dr. Shirley Jackson helped make connection possible, but her name rarely gets called. So the spotlight for tonight again is Dr. Shirley Jackson, and her contribution to society was through the touchstone phones, caller ID, and these wonderful fiber optic communications that allow us to use Wi-Fi on a daily basis.
Absolutely. 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 Kings. It's always good fellowship every single time we get
Yes.
together. For those who are listening, we encourage your likes, your thoughts, your suggestions, your questions, and also, and I forgot to mention that we're on YouTube, We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Deezer. We're on Riverside FM. We're also on what's the other? I can't remember. We're coming to TikTok soon. So if you can't get on there and watch that video, if you're riding down that road, you can pop on Spotify. We're on Spotify as well. Spotify as well. So you can, if you can't watch it, you can always listen to us on those platforms. Be sure to check us out, and always love you, Kings.
All right, love y'all.
Love y'all.